What happens when the ocean rises up? Not just to flood a city, but to shock the world's entire supply chain. When a tsunami strikes, it doesn't just devastate coastlines, it disables ports, cuts off trade, and brings even the most efficient logistics networks to a standstill. Tsunamis are among the most unpredictable and wide-reaching natural disasters. Unlike hurricanes or floods that often have limited geographic reach, tsunamis can sweep across entire ocean basins, impacting numerous countries and coastlines within hours. The logistical consequences are immense, not just due to the initial destruction, but due to the cascading failures that follow. From port closures and supply chain collapses to factory shutdowns and long-term shifts in global trade patterns, the aftershocks can last months or even years. Today we're taking you on a deep dive into one of the least understood, yet most devastating forces in global trade disruption: tsunamis. What exactly happens to global logistics when a tsunami hits? How do industries recover? And what can we learn from past events to build a more resilient future? When a tsunami hits, the port infrastructure, often located right at sea level, is almost always the first to be overwhelmed. Ports are built to handle routine weather disturbances and even strong storm surges, but they are rarely built to withstand the scale and velocity of tsunami waves. In 2011, Japan's northeast coast was struck by waves that reached up to 40 meters in height. 14 major ports were impacted, some rendered completely unusable for months. Containers were scattered like toys, warehouses were flooded, and massive gantry cranes were snapped at their base. Entire ships were lifted out of the sea and hurled inland, damaging buildings, roads, and anything in their path. The impact was not confined to Japan. That same tsunami reached as far as Chile and the U.S. West Coast. In California, Crescent City Harbor was devastated. The ripple effect caused a global reshuffling of shipping lanes and delayed hundreds of vessels. Ports like Los Angeles and Seattle had to adjust their schedules, accommodate diverted cargo, and manage port congestion for weeks. Ports are not just gateways, they are linchpins. When one is knocked offline, especially a large one, the effect on global freight movement is enormous. Ships are rerouted, sometimes thousands of kilometers off course. Insurance premiums spike. Congestion builds up in alternate ports, leading to further delays. Even a short shutdown of a key port can have cascading effects throughout the global economy, especially in highly integrated sectors like electronics and automotive. And rebuilding ports is not a fast process. After the 2011 disaster, some Japanese ports took more than a year to return to pre-tsunami operational capacity. Others had to be rebuilt from scratch. The scale of damage and the economic shockwaves illustrate just how vulnerable maritime logistics truly are. A tsunami is not just a localized event. When it disables ports, destroys infrastructure, and knocks out industrial zones, the entire global supply chain feels it. After the 2011 tsunami, Japan's northeast region, home to thousands of suppliers, was paralyzed. Key automotive and electronics parts stopped flowing. Car manufacturers like Toyota, Nissan, and Honda weren't the only ones affected. Their Tier 1 suppliers, their Tier 2 suppliers, and eventually their customers abroad all experienced interruptions. Within days, automakers in the US, Europe, and South Korea were forced to shut down lines. Not because their facilities were damaged, but because they simply couldn't get the components they needed, things as small as microcontrollers or as specific as high-grade paint pigment. One of the most extreme examples was the xerolic pigment plant in Fukushima. This facility, owned by Merck, produced a specialized metallic pigment used in automotive paints. Its destruction meant that major brands worldwide, including Ford, GM, and BMW, had to suspend the availability of several car colors. In electronics, the story was equally dramatic. Semiconductor fabrication is an ultra-concentrated industry. In 2011, Renesas Electronics, which controlled up to 40% of the global market for automotive microcontrollers, had one of its largest factories put out of commission. Lead times doubled or tripled. Manufacturers couldn't pivot easily. These components were highly specialized. What followed was not just a temporary delay, but a revelation: the just-in-time model, which had become a gold standard in global supply chains, proved extremely vulnerable to shocks of this scale. Companies suddenly realized they didn't even know the full extent of their supply chains. In many cases, firms only had visibility to their Tier 1 suppliers. But when the tsunami hit, it was the Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers, those hidden beneath the surface, that brought production lines to a halt. Beyond ports and production plants, tsunamis can annihilate the very infrastructure that holds logistics together: roads, rail lines, power grids, fuel depots. In 2011, the Tohoku region of Japan experienced complete transportation paralysis. Key highways like the Tohoku Expressway were rendered unusable. Rail links were washed away, local roads were impassable due to debris, flooding, and collapsed bridges. Relief logistics became an enormous challenge. Trucks couldn't reach affected areas. Fuel shortages became widespread as distribution networks failed. Supermarkets ran out of supplies. Hospitals ran short on medicines. Even those outside the immediate impact zone suffered delays in shipments and restocking. Air transport helped, but was no replacement. Airports like Sendai were initially underwater, and even when functioning, aircraft cargo capacity is a fraction of sea or rail. Power outages compounded the chaos. With large regions cut off from electricity, manufacturing stopped, warehouse systems went dark, and refrigerated goods spoiled. Cold chain logistics completely broke down. These breakdowns revealed how interdependent our infrastructure really is. One weak link, be it energy, fuel, or roads, can topple entire systems. And with climate change increasing the frequency of extreme weather events, the risk of multi-system failure is growing. The tsunami's impact wasn't theoretical, it was industry-defining. In the automotive sector, global production fell by over 4 million vehicles in 2011. Toyota lost close to 150,000 units of output in North America alone. Honda, Nissan, Subaru, none were spared. Dealerships ran out of inventory. Wait times stretched to months. And the impact wasn't just limited to Japanese brands. Ford and GM faced shortages of critical parts. Plants in the US, Canada, and even Europe had to reduce shifts or halt operations entirely. In electronics, the effect was just as severe. Smartphones, PCs, TVs, every device that relied on Japanese semiconductors or precision components faced delays. Sony, Panasonic, Toshiba, all suffered production losses. What made matters worse was the nature of the components, highly customized, built to exacting standards, and sourced from a handful of facilities worldwide. There was no easy backup plan. Tech companies scrambled. Some scoured global inventories. Others tried redesigning boards to accept alternative chips. Few succeeded. It was a harsh lesson in how tightly coupled modern industries are. A ripple in Japan triggered shockwaves from Detroit to Dusseldorf. The tsunami was a wake-up call, and in its aftermath, industries began to rethink how they approach logistics. Toyota responded by building one of the world's most sophisticated supply chain risk management systems. They classified thousands of parts by risk level. For high-risk components, they increased inventory buffers. They also diversified sourcing and required key suppliers to hold extra stock. Other firms followed. Dual sourcing became a norm. Firms started mapping their entire supplier ecosystems, not just Tier 1 but Tier 2 and Tier 3. Advanced planning systems were adopted using AI and big data to simulate disaster scenarios. Companies also began thinking about the design of products themselves. Could a component be standardized? Could multiple vendors be qualified? Supply chain resilience became a competitive advantage. Investors started asking questions about risk exposure. Customers began valuing transparency. What emerged was a new paradigm, not just low cost, but low risk. Efficiency mattered, but not at the expense of survivability. Governments didn't sit idle either. In Japan, over $10 billion was invested into coastal defenses. Seawalls were raised, breakwaters were fortified, backup power systems were installed, ports were redesigned with tsunami risk in mind. New regulations required critical infrastructure to relocate or elevate sensitive systems. Emergency drills became frequent. New early warning systems were deployed. In the United States, the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program released maritime guidance for ports. Port operators were trained on how to evacuate ships, secure equipment, and recover operations faster. Some regions began forming port alliances, agreements that allowed cargo to be diverted and shared across networks if one port became inoperable. Infrastructure hardening wasn't just about concrete and steel, it became a mindset, a new way of designing logistics networks to survive the unexpected. Today, the risks are even greater. Urban growth has placed more people and infrastructure near vulnerable coastlines. Rising sea levels increase baseline water levels, giving tsunamis an even longer reach. The South China Sea, home to several of the world's busiest ports, is a major concern. A single major tsunami event could shut down shipping lanes, halt electronics exports, and freeze industrial supply chains across East Asia. In a world of hyper-globalized trade, we can no longer afford to ignore natural disaster risks. Building resilience is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Tsunamis teach us more than geology. They teach us about systems, about interconnections, about how one crack can cause a collapse. They force us to ask hard questions. Are our ports truly protected? Do we understand our supply chain vulnerabilities? Can we respond quickly when disaster strikes? The answers will define the future of global trade, because tsunamis are not just waves, they are tests of our infrastructure, of our planning, of our resilience. And if we want to keep global logistics flowing, we must be ready. Thanks for watching today's video. I hope you found it helpful and insightful. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button and subscribe to logisticsABC. Turn on notifications so you never miss out on future videos. Check out the recommended videos here for more great content. Thanks for being part of the logisticsABC community, and see you in the next video.